drills or anything? Oh, have you?
I love.
And then we do.
Right. Do y'all have medics that follow on the bikes or anything like that? When you do marathons?
No, we have like horses that
Yeah. I'm thinking about it.
it's like a marathon.
Right. Staged out. We did the same thing on South. They did a marathon on South Padre. They were in dire need of people, so I told them, look, this is how we can set it up. And they were looking for just medics to be on standby. So you got to have a way to move them. You're not just an ambulance. So we were able to get some bikes.
Nothing else.
Vehicles.
Count on Joe. I was paying attention, sir. I don't have the kids.
No kids.
So am I. No, I know. They're in North Carolina. They're keeping that. Check. Mic check. Reticle. I'm in a good mood.
Sorry.
Yeah, Shalon, sorry. Looks like a lot of people. How are you guys doing? Welcome to the GTAC Disaster Committee. My name's Eric Epley. I'm the chair, and we'll begin the meeting. We'll start with roll call. I am here. Michael Beimer. Here. Tim Berry. Wanda Helgeson.
Here.
Dr. Kidd is not here, and Chief Kidd is not here. They're at the FEMA National Advisory Council. I don't know if you guys actually know that, but they were invited to be it's about a 15-member advisory council to FEMA, so it's good that we had both them from the emergency medicine perspective and from one of the biggest emergency management programs in the country. So they're at that today. Robbie Kirk. Here. Sari McCoy. Shalon Montgomery. Sharon Knowles. Sharon Knowles should be here. That's not, oh, no. She's not going to be here. She told me because of the schedule change. Rennie Pettis. Here. Ricky Reeves. We'll get to that in a second. Edwin Smith. Kenneth Webb. Here. Michael Wilson. Here. Jason Adelot. Dr. Here. Adelot. Sorry. Here. And Jacob Johnson. Here. Angela Gentry.
Here.
So welcome, Jacob, Dr. Adelot, and Angela. Could you please set your devices to vibrate? Welcome you guys to the committee. We're excited to have you. I know that's going to be some new energy that's always welcomed. We appreciate your commitment for the next couple of 3 years, and welcome. I want to go specifically into the Ricky Reeves. Ricky's not here, and frankly, I think he's slacking a little bit. I mean, he had brain surgery and all. I don't know why he's not here. So for those of you who aren't on all the list servers and stuff, I'm pleased to be able to be this lighthearted about one of the worst things that I'd ever gotten a call about. Ricky had a tumor, ended up being a benign tumor in his brainstem, below the foramen, like in the worst possible location ever. And if you start having some right arm pain, you should go see somebody quickly, apparently. So that was his first sign and or symptom, really. Went in, had a CT done, and 6 weeks later, they were cutting the back of his head open. And I personally would like to thank Zale Lipsky, specifically Dr. Mickey from UT Southwestern, who You saved my friend's life.
We should take a selfie and send
Yeah.
it to Ricky.
We should take a selfie. He's probably watching. Yeah. Damn it. I cleared that up. It's good stuff. That's good stuff. I really am. It's amazing stuff. It's just 2 brain surgeries in 1 week, 7 days. He's home for the Super Bowl. I told him he was a resilient son of a gun. Do we have a quorum, actually? Did we count this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We do. Just barely. Woo. Okay. Sharon Knowles didn't make it. Oh, on the other, Sharon Knowles can't make it. We scheduled the GTAC thing. We're going to have a conversation. Colin, thank you, and Joe for the email threads. I haven't written back because, frankly, I don't know what I would say is, Colin said, what day should we pick about moving GTAC to this second week? Not the second week would be my only preference from here on out. Just, I don't even care if it's third, fourth, first, honestly. It seems like, and I was going to ask you guys, has it historically been the third week or the fourth week of the month?
I think it's been the third.
I think it's been the third week. And the rationale, you guys let me know if you agree with this, because I'm going to take it forward to the main GTAC on Friday. You know, the department is subject to the whims of some of these contracts of availability of hotels in the Austin area, which during certain parts of the year are very difficult. They have to put them out a year ahead of time. So it's tough for them to pick these rooms, but we've got to reinforce that it can't be the second week, if nothing else. At least from at least 5 of the racks I've talked to, we've constructed all of our meeting sets to try to deconflict with the state, with the GTAC meetings. And when they land the meetings here back on top of our second week of the world, it really does wreck the calendar. And it's tougher because now we've got February and May back, and they're even back to back, which is worse, right? So our executive committee, PI, just a ton of meetings, tough. So anybody disagree with that in the audience or on the committee? Sorry. Okay, we will bring that up to them. With respect to the new members, why don't we go, this is our first meeting with you guys here, right? Okay. So Jacob, tell us 10 seconds about yourself, but like it's not the dating game, but give us an idea.
Okay, so I'm Jacob Johnson. I'm with HCA North Texas as an EMS specialist. Been involved in EMTF pretty heavily through our RAC and EMTF2. And so glad to be here. Looking forward to the opportunity.
Thanks. Angie?
I'm Angie Gentry. I'm from Baylor Scott and White, Central Texas Division. I'm the emergency manager for the division. I was 8 years an ER nurse and worked with EMTF for the last 5 years pretty heavily with EMTF 7. I'm really excited to be here.
What you don't know about Angie, she's actually an incredible nurse manager, nurse director. She was at South Padre and did a fantastic job in some of the craziest times. I didn't really know her till then. I didn't know her like I know her now. I affectionately call, I have another one nearby, I gotta be careful. I call them attack nurses. And I say that with the most affection ever because they are people who are viciously passionate about patients, and they will protect those patients and care for those patients regardless of if you are a resident, a neurosurgeon, whoever you are. They will, not that they're protecting them from you, Dr. Alot. So sometimes, but they are committed to patient care like no other, and I'm proud. I'm married to one, by the way, so I know them reasonably well. There's another one. There's one in pink back there that's staring at me right now. So Jory Klein is the king of them, probably. But if we don't have people who keep their eye on the ball constantly for the patient, I think we lose something magical that's important in emergency health care. So thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
Dr.
I'm Jason Adelot. I'm a trauma surgeon here in Austin. I'm the lead trauma facility representative and the chair of the PI committee for the CAT-RAC. My history is that I was in the military for a long time and have a particular interest in hospital disaster preparedness and management plans. And I'm honored to be a part of the team.
Thank you, Jason. Well, you don't know about Jason. Let me go. Actually, he's a good friend, a wonderful surgeon, has done many tours, has served our country well, and we were honored to have him in San Antonio. And he was, at first, really got to know him on the disaster level, and we piqued his interest in disaster after he did a field amputation and removed a leg at the upper femur with a giggly saw in the middle of a pretty gnarly situation. So Jason will walk the talk, and has been there and done that. And I think that level of expertise, both with his war experience and field experience here in Texas now, and his role as a trauma surgeon in the Austin area, is important. So Jason, thank you. I won't tell him the helicopter story. Good. We're off to the races here. We had a snafu. If you guys have the minutes, those minutes, we're going to send the corrected minutes out. It was one version versus the other, and one job got printed. So apologies. We'll get those out to you on the email. Dr. Kidd is not here. We're going to go straight to the TDMS report out. And Joe, I'm going to ask you to cover TMORT and EMTF and IDRU kind of all at once, if you think you can handle that. So,
I'm Irish. I have the gift of the gab. I can talk about it. So the TDMS meeting was. The TDMS meeting was a couple weeks ago, and we spent a bunch of time trying to refocus our work groups. We've been doing some good work for the last couple of years, and I think Dr. Kidd's preference was to make sure that we got our arms around what the work groups were continuing to do to make sure that it stayed within the scope of the direction given by DSHS and the steering committee itself. So we spent a bunch of time talking about what we've accomplished and what we'd like to accomplish in the future, and trying to make sure that those work groups that TDMS is fielding are doing the appropriate work. We did spend some time talking about some of the mass fatality initiatives, which I'll go into a little bit in the EMTF briefing. And we also discussed a renewed focus on the public health side of the SF8 in our discussions. Understand that there was some challenges with some turnover in some of those teams. We want to make sure that we have a good understanding of how those are going to work going forward. That was pretty much what we talked about during that last meeting.
So, and I'd like to introduce Sarah actually as well, if you want to do that now.
Yeah. As far as the EMTF report, most of you guys know that I've been an interim program manager, and I told you. So we have interviewed and selected Sarah Jensen, the coordinator from Region 8, to be the state program manager. Congratulations, Sarah. So this is one of the last times I'll get to brief y'all.
Oh, we'll find something for you to talk about, young Joe. Do not think you're going far.
And as far as what's happening with EMTF, because I promised Sarah on the first week on the job or second week that we wouldn't make her brief GTAC. The main focus of effort at the state program office right now is the IDRU and TMORT initiatives. So I'll start with the TMORT because that kind of ties back to TDMS. This last committee meeting, we discussed the integration of the mass fatality response capability, or TMORT, in EMTF. That was a topic that was brought up in November at a different meeting at the SOC. And we've been working pretty hard with the folks from CETRAC and the folks from the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office to work out the details as far as that goes with MOAs and so forth. We had a meeting 2 days ago with that group, and there's some pretty good, there's good work being done. They're working hard at the operational level, figuring out what they're going to need to be doing, and we're working to assist with how we're going to support what those roles look like and how the state's going to activate those resources when necessary. So good work going on there, and looking for more progress as time goes by.
So I'm going to speak further than you. That was sort of the politically correct version of that. So CETRAC bought a $400,000 DPMU with their own money. They have some of the best forensic experts in the country. Certainly in Texas, they have led this TMORT effort. Jason and Allison, we're lucky to have them. The TMORT effort will be coming into the EMTF fold, the contracting process to get new staffers, but we're going to wrap that into the world of EMTF, and we're excited about that. EMTF 6, CETRAC specifically, will take the lead with Jason and Allison's instruction. The reason for that is there's not very many medical examiners in the state. It's not like we need 8 teams across the state. We don't. What we do need is one focus team with members from across the state. Really, it's probably one of the times, it's a little bit like MIST in that way. We will have one big TMORT with some capability, and those people will come from all over. And I think that's going to be based heavily out of Houston, but there may be a medical examiner or a radiology tech from Dallas or somebody from Lubbock, whatever it is, and that's yet to come for this year of work. We'd like to see that up and running and operational. I mean, I'm just going to put a deadline of like hurricane season, but I won't hurt you too bad on that. Dr. Adela.
This is to identify bodies? Is that what this is for?
So this is after, so at West, for instance, after the explosion occurred at West, we sent an MMU, we sent ambuses, we send those other things, but there's a piece that follows afterward that's the mortuary. It's sort of picking through the remains and then lining those up, and that happens after the fact. It's a deliberate and slower process, and strictly speaking, you would say, well, how does the EMTF have a role in that necessarily? I mean, there's a decent argument to be made there. The problem is a logistical one. The problem is not the guys who are picking up the remains, which, by the way, as we found in the Columbia disaster, end up still being firefighters and rescue guys and sort of all our guys anyway, because there's not enough of those medical examiner forensic types to go out and search. When we're going to talk about mass, we're going to be getting some spontaneous volunteer professional assistance to get the remains collection. Then there's this other component where we start matching DNA, looking through and talking to those people. There's a group of forensic experts that we want to enable, but all of the other wraparound services around them, a tent is a tent, right? The box truck to get the stuff there, the driver of the box truck, whether he has the DPMU in it or has a mobile medical unit tent in it, it's the same guys, right? And so we're trying not to we're not trying to recreate the logistics and wraparound services as opposed to the core function. When you take those core function people and set them in this and you put the wraparound services, we're just sharing the logistics, and more importantly, honestly, is the contractual part, is getting people paid, getting them covered with workers' comp. So we've worked through all those issues on EMTF. So I don't know if that helps. Does everybody understand that? Have we talked about that before? Okay. Anybody have any concern or objection to that, by the way? Who thinks that's the smartest idea they've heard in a while? Just raise your hand. Who's awake? Hey. I told you it's going to be fun.
Eric,
Yes.
we have had some opportunity of late to do planning for an upcoming event, and in a discussion with our medical examiners, we tried to set some thresholds when they would need help. So we could identify if there was an explosion and if there are 25 bodies, they can manage that on their own. If it gets above 25, then they would need help. And so I did send an email that said, okay, if I were to call right now and say, we need three medical examiners and we need 6 autopsy assistants, how long would it take us to get that? Just so that we could do our planning. And the answer was, ooh, that's going to be tough. So I would encourage that we ask that group to sort of do some tabletops about how that would happen. And that is assuming that these were intact bodies. Right. If, in fact, we are doing identifications, then the threshold for when we would need assistance is much lower. So as they build that out and build out that deployable team, that would be very helpful, I think, if the regions kind of knew what that was, and we could take the opportunity to figure out how many can we store, how many autopsies can we do in X number of days, and when are we going to throw in the towel and ask for help?
So I got that, Wanda, and that's on, actually I was on their list as activation processes. And to me, this feels eerily similar to the problem.
ETF.
It feels eerily similar to the problem we have with identifying what a mass casualty incident, what an MCI looks like. Well, an MCI in some of my counties would be 5 patients needing 3 ambulances, right? 5 patients at 410 and I-10 in San Antonio's was 8:30 this morning. I'm not saying that one way or the other. I'm saying mass casualties are overwhelming of local resources, whatever that is. And so I think that we will have a very flexible, given the wide variety of the capability, especially the forensic capability in Texas, we will be very flexible and leaning forward to help when needed. I don't want to derail too much of this. You know, this falls into our bucket, not because there's just not a lot of ESF 8 planning folks. It seems like there are, but really there's not. We all end up at these conversations and get tagged with some of this information, and you know, a county judge, a sheriff, a fire chief, or the medical guys. How about you guys at the medical table? What are we going to do for that? Next thing you know, you're working on veterinary services too, right? You go, well, how did we get, wait a minute. Well, it's better than the sheriff figuring it out, right? At least there's a little bit of connection to ESF 8 for us, so more to follow on.
The other thing that I think would be helpful is if we in Texas all know that our line for assistance is TMORT. But within the TMORT peeps, they know when they have to pull the lever to call for DMORT. When we're talking about bodies that, I mean, operational bodies, not dead bodies, that can come and assist, so that we know what that rapid response is going to be and how rapid is defined.
Yep. More to follow as that fleshes out. These are exactly the conversations they had last week.
Yeah. The meeting was rather short the other day because the list of tasks grew quite long and daunting, and just decided to.
Sometimes it's better to put the task list together
Yeah.
just at the meeting than it is to actually try to
There's a
solve.
lot of work to be done, and they're on it.
If you're interested in that, let us know. Talk to Joe, and he can get you connected in. Sarah will. Sarah, welcome. Glad you're here. And next in May, you're on. IDRU.
Okay. The other initiative that we're working pretty hard on right now is the infectious disease response unit capability within the EMTF. So a couple weeks ago, we had more of a planning meeting with our executive governance folks and some others to figure out how we're going to tackle this pretty significant problem. Our funding has come through from DSHS. It's been finalized and it's available. So we're going to start the process that we've discussed a couple times, and if you haven't heard it, you'll hear it now. It's basically what we've done is we've scheduled the initial advisory committee meeting for March 9th and 10th for a very small, even though it's large, it is a small group of subject matter experts that were hand selected by our executive governance committee to provide some feedback and some information on where they think we should be going with this, and give us some pearls of wisdom in the development of this animal so that we're doing it right. It was the first question, so we've talked about this a couple times in some meetings and some conferences since then. The first question I get is, how do I get on that committee? And the answer is, your name was probably on the wall at some point, and we had to do some serious whittling to get down to the appropriate number, which for us was around 60 of the subject matter experts alone. And then there's obviously the kind of wraparound. You need some people to take the notes and do the work. So those folks are in the room as well. But the intent is to, and these are subject matter experts in their field, whether they be folks that develop deployable systems to go overseas to Africa to help with the Ebola crisis there, whether it was tropical disease and infectious disease physicians and practitioners from large urban medical centers, that sort of thing. Those are the types of folks that we have on our invite list. And the plan is just to spend a day or two asking questions and talking about processes and protocols and kind of absorbing their guidance. So that's going to happen in about 5 weeks. And from there, I envision several work groups coming out of that to flesh out some of the details as far as what we're going to do. So some of the folks that are sitting in the room saying, I'd really like to be part of that, that's where we're going to be looking for some serious assistance in actually making the guidance, which will likely be 50,000-foot guidance, something more concrete that we can document and make part of our process. So that's moving along pretty quickly, and we have another kind of interim planning meeting scheduled for the end of this week so that we can finish the details and get the invites out and make sure those folks are coming. But, I'm pretty excited about that. It's a long time coming. It comes with a significant amount of funding that's going to assist the EMTF in general with a lot of our needs, and it's a good thing.
The subject matter experts, by the way, are infectious disease doctors, intensivists, emergency medicine doctors, DOD. We've invited some DOD people who have been in infectious disease, who are really kind of some of the lead people that end up going to wild parts of the world. We have some folks from health science centers who are from those departments. We have, I think, a really good group to give us the right information to get started. Joe, that's been a good effort. Good.
Remind me the funding. The funding stream.
So it's some Ebola money, the money that came down special for Ebola, targeted at that. Some of it is HPP funding, and some of it is public health emergency preparedness money. It's a try, and some was state exceptional item dollars as well.
Correct. There's some general
for Ebola
dollars that were earmarked for Ebola through an exceptional item in last year's legislative cycle, and then there's some hospital preparedness supplemental funds and some public health. And really, the public health supplemental funds were more to support the purchase of PPE for the local public health departments. Just because we're buying a bunch of PPE, it made sense to not have 2 people buying PPE. So they
lumped in with ours to get the economy of scale.
The IDRU will not necessarily be funded by any PHEP funds.
So the total amount over the 3-year period, Micah, is about 4.2, 4.7, 4.2.
4.2. The 4.7 includes the public health cash.
Okay, and this year's dollars alone are about 1.8, 1.9. There's a rapid turnaround for this. There will be a flurry of activity over the next 5 months with respect to IDRU, I can tell you. The amendment being processed was the part that was extremely, was just holding us back, and we didn't get that till mid to late January. So we're in good shape now. Amendments through, the monies are free, and so we will be moving forward rapidly. Starts with the advisory process, the work groups, purchases of equipment, deployment of that equipment, and concurrent with that will be the rostering of teams in each area, right? So there are people who are at your at your assessment hospitals. We would like them to be involved. I mean, it's voluntary, they're not voluntold, but we think they're going to be interested in doing that because they're going to end up coming back to their hospital anyway, theoretically, in the plan. Can I task Dr. Adelon? Go ahead.
This is all work groups that you're discussing that are underneath this committee?
Yeah, not this committee. So that's perfect lead in. I want us to build and have for May a map of the landscape to include GTAC, disaster and emergency preparedness, TDMS, Preparedness Coordinating Council. Let's just draw it, right? Let's put it on. How do these interact? What are the roles? And then, more importantly, the EMTF, which does fall, sort of directly in line with our group. The challenge I think we've had in the growth of this has been a little asymmetrical. It's not. I mean, there are different groups meeting at different times for different purposes, with slightly different focuses. Some of us touch some or all of those groups, and you feel like it's Groundhog Day in some cases. HPP and PHEP programs need to be in there as well. I don't know if I mentioned those or not. So, does that help? I'd like to just put it up on the map and say, how do these all interact? And I think it'll fall into kind of a more response-driven versus a strategy-driven focus where those groups are working. We were kind of the original. If you guys remember back in 2000, after Katrina Rita, the PCC was there, the HPP programs were there, but this committee was a task force. How many people remember being at THA in the red room, in the red carpet room? Raise your hand. Yeah, there we go. So 8-10 years ago, we were meeting sporadically as a task force, and there were no members. Everybody was a member. If you came to the meeting, you got to be a member, right? It was an ollie oxen-free moment. We have, if you really looked at that journey for a decade, things are much more structured, maybe too structured, maybe too structured. It's hard to get everything in 90 minutes in here except doing report outs. The real work is happening in these groups that we've created with other folks working on it. It's the nature of bureaucracy sometimes. It makes me a little anxious, but it is what it is. That map we'll discuss, and I think that'll be helpful for everybody. Probably helpful for the audience. Might be helpful for me, who knows. That covers you, Joe. You are free and clear, I think. We have testimony today. There's a public health committee hearing going on today, all day, for infectious disease and other natural disaster stuff. And I'm testifying later on 4 regional structures. That's the sort of focus of mine. Dr. Peirce from Houston is testifying. Dr. Hellerstadt, is that correctly? The new Commissioner of Health is testifying. And I forgot, I think there's a county judge in our group, in our section. Then there's another section where they have some ID physicians and other specialists talking as well. Okay.
Eric, in your map, can you put in that infectious disease group that's meeting in a parallel world? They continue to meet as well, correct?
Which one? Probably yes.
Appointed SME.
Oh, the Texas Task Force. Yes, that's been reappointed.
Yeah, so could we put them in the map? So
That's a good idea.
doing too?
Sarah, did you get that? The task force on infectious disease. Okay. Any questions on all that stuff from the committee? Any discussion about it? What do you think about the maps? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just trying to draw it, because I didn't even understand. Well, I mean, I thought, Joe, you work for him, why, or who? I mean, it would be nice to know, like, all on one slide map, too. None of this, like, one slide, now we're gonna go to another, because I'm gonna get confused. Like, governor stuff. And where, because
Yep.
I mean, I'm just new to this committee, but it seems like what you're talking about seems redundant to some of the things we're doing. But if it all falls underneath us, that sounds reasonable. But yeah,
No,
that's a great, I would love to see that.
It would be extremely helpful to understand when people are dual or triple hatting.
Sure.
There are people who are employed by Iraq, not Iraq, but ARAC.
That would be me.
Right. Wanda.
RAC.
Wanda is in El Paso and is the executive director at that RAC. But she's also responsible in large part for setting up a lot of the response to the Pope arriving very
It's the
shortly.
discussion with medical examiner.
Right. And she's on this committee, and she's an HPP committee. I mean, she's a contractor on the HPP side, so on the hospital preparedness side. So it'll be worthwhile, and your not stupidity, your ignorance to this. I mean, honestly, that's what it is. It's beautiful because it's going to help us map out. There are redundancies.
Thank you.
There are redundancies all over the place, and some of them are necessary evils. Some of them could be cleaned up, and this is a constructive conversation.
Yeah, fresh eyes.
Fresh eyes are valuable. It's one of the reasons we've struggle with, you know, new appointees and all those kind of things is it's always helpful to bring fresh blood in and go, I don't get it. Seriously, I don't get it. What are we doing? What's the point of us being here? Right.
No, that's the first thing I thought of. When you started reporting on, y'all met last week here in Austin. Well, I was here in Austin. I'm all interested in all this, and I'm thinking, well, why are we meeting this week? But that's going to be really
Careful.
well.
Yeah,
That would be really helpful. That map would be really helpful.
It does beg the question, you know, when we if you thought about preparedness, I mean, even health, you know, related, you know, medical preparedness, from radiological and EMP to infectious disease to mass cow, I mean, 90 minutes isn't a lot of time to solve even one part of one of them. And there are large dollars that have been allocated over the last decade and a half almost now. And the structures where real work has to be done with real contractual obligations, as opposed to bringing in people who really should help us go not the right direction. I'm not going to go to all your meetings and do all your work, but you guys are headed off into the wrong direction. You're working really hard and you're headed for a cliff. We need to be, you guys need to go that way. That's this group more often than not, as opposed to what are we going to put on the mobile medical unit so that we have the right, what's the formulary for the mobile medical unit? Good. We've had hours talking about the mobile medical unit formulary in smaller EMS medical director groups. The doctors who are going to go there. I would rather them decide what they want in their kits, frankly, and those all happen. But no one knows those things are happening if we don't bring it to a more public and structured forum every quarter in this group. I don't know if that's making any sense or not. I somehow feel like I'm justifying all the bureaucracy in some ways.
No.
No, I am. I'm listening to myself thinking, you sound like a bureaucrat.
It would be, one of the principles of disaster management, at least in my experience, is minimizing the amount of phone calls you need to make the system work. If something bad were to happen, someone needs to know a number to call. And so
The 1-800-HELP ME.
Well, if there's two 1-800-HELP me's, or God forbid 3 or 4, well, which one is really responsible? And if they're all three thinking that they're responsible, they're probably not all three being as good as they could possibly be, because you could have hired all three of those people and sit at the chair of some little subcommittee to be all part of one, paying twice as much, and everyone would be happier and work better.
When in our state, with and I wish Chief Kidd were here because he would absolutely agree with you. And there's a plan. He tells Dr. Kidd all the time, just because you may not know the plan doesn't mean there's not a plan. I mean, she gets a little frustrated with that, but the emergency management structure writ large, right? Not medical stuff, but fire and law and recovery efforts and all the things that emergency management does. All focuses at the local emergency management coordinator level. The local emergency management coordinator in Austin, who's the EMC for Austin, actually, City of Austin? Who knows? I actually don't know right now. Otis, I didn't know that. Otis Black is the emergency management coordinator. He is at Cmte, yes? He's at the communications center over there off of Old Manor. He works for the City of Austin, and he has the ability to ask for additional resources. In fact, the way those resources requested go through Otis. So if Austin EMS responds to a problem, I'll just use them as an example, and they need more stuff, that works up through their chain and goes to Otis. Otis approves it, it goes to the state, and then stuff starts flowing. That's a simplified version of it, but that's the way it works. In this audience, on this committee, Chief Kidd is the Texas Division of Emergency Management chief. He is the head guy. So he's been on this committee really since the inception, and the integration of TDEM with this group has been invaluable, and we are subordinate to that process. Maxie Bishop used to be the EMS, state EMS director. He's in the back, got his head down, but he now works for Chief Kidd at the Division of Emergency Management. So our integration with the emergency management process, I think, is strong. I worry sometimes our linkage is lost below the local emergency management, and I'd say emergency medical management side to the average clinician. I wonder if the average ER nurse has any clue about the way this would all work and the 1-800-HELP-ME kind of an idea. The second question is, and I mean this respectfully, do they need to know?
They just need to know who at their facility to contact if they need the widget. And then from that individual knowing at the city, county level, or the disaster.
So I, in general, I agree with that, and I think following the chain is important. What I found that most of our problems seem to happen when the emergency management coordinator for the hospital is not there. I don't know why that is. I don't know if we're jinxed, but it's not. You know, we had one of our hospitals, they called it 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and the power went out, and nobody had any flashlights because they bought a ton of flashlights, but they were all locked up in the emergency management coordinator's closet because they were really good flashlights, and they spent a lot of money on them. They didn't want to all over the hospital. I mean, you sort of see their point, except that, you know, at the moment in the nurses station on 4C, a big flashlight would have been pretty helpful. And so there's this constant battle, I think, between everybody knowing everything and what they're willing to learn, and just-in-time training. Mickey Stein, Dr. Stein, a surgeon from Israel, he comes and speaks frequently here in the U.S., and they take I was showing him EM system and some other things, which, by the way, his thing about EM system, where we collect all the red, yellow, and green beds, he said, it's irrelevant. I said, well, no, that's our system. It's great. He said, if you have 500 patients, you're going to take them to the hospital. If you have 5,000 patients, you're going to take them to the hospital. You're not going to leave them out there, so it's irrelevant. I thought, yeah, good point. But he said the most important piece of equipment in the ER for disaster is the bullhorn. That's what he said. He said, we have decided, he says, in America, it seems like you guys make everybody take ICS 100 and 200, and you're trying to boil the ocean. And so you raise the bar 1 degree. He said, we tend to have subject matter expert leaders, both formal and informal leaders in our emergency department and our trauma system in the hospital that people are going to rely on. They rely on every day. I mean, every day in a trauma center is kind of a little mini disaster. You're kind of figuring out what's going to go up, what's not, that kind of stuff. And he said, in a big mass cow, and his definition of that at the time was more than 40 patients in less than an hour. Was it 40 in an hour? He said, well, we've had about 20 of those in the last 2 years. I'm going, good Lord. That's a lot of experience. And he said that the nurse manager or team leader, whatever, gets the bullhorn because everybody's going to come down to help, and someone's got to know exactly what the plan is. And he says, we have a lot of those people on, but they're on duty, right? I mean, that's really kind of the key, is that they're on duty and they have an idea about the plan. So I guess my mix of making sure we don't go outside the chain with our emergency management staff in the ER, in the hospital, is to combine that with the clinical leadership that actually will lead the hospital for the first 90, 120 minutes, right? At Saturday night at 10 o'clock, the people who are, in fact, I've said this before, you guys have heard me say, a house supervisor gets significantly more power than the later in the night it goes. At 9 o'clock, they may not be able to do what at 3 a.m. I'm not sure they couldn't sell the hospital at 4 a.m., right? I'm not sure. They get a lot of power the later it goes. They don't have to call as many people to do things. So who did this? Right. So my point is, I think our linkage is with those natural, both formal and informal leaders, house supervisors, those kind of folks who can help link up when we have a problem at a hospital. The other thing is, hospitals are usually second they're sort of first receivers, not necessarily where the problem is. And we see challenges when they are the problem because they're normally expected to be told, hey, there's a problem coming, get ready. When they are the problem, the active shooter or something spontaneously happening in the ER, that catches us a little more off guard because we're normally used to expecting, hey, there's a bus wreck, we're going to be bringing you patients in 20 minutes, et cetera. Thoughts on that from the group? I don't know if you're welcome to just disagree like crazy.
Eric, I think one of the issues also is how well recognized the role of emergency management is within a specific hospital. I think we all recognize in the rural facilities, those individuals wear a lot of hats. But we have a lot of large hospitals that do not have full-time emergency management individuals. They are still doing lots of other things. And that's all fine and good until the 40 patients come in an hour, and then when things start to fall down, then there has to be somebody who's responsible for that. So I think sort of altering the importance of the emergency management coordinators at the hospitals would be helpful.
Want to say that?
I think the bigger issue is the disconnect between emergency management and actual patient care. I think a lot of times emergency managers don't see the big picture and leave out the patient part of it. So making sure that those are brought together and see the big picture, and it makes a big difference if they have some kind of medical background and take the patients into account, not just the Joint Commission standards.
That's, you know, it's so funny she said that because I wrote life safety versus clinical surge. And you know, there are, I think if there's anything I've learned in the last, 10 or 15 years in this genre, there are two distinct and in some ways opposing focuses for hospital preparedness. The first is keeping the building alive. Keeping the building alive with supplemental water, electricity, capability in the building to keep it alive, to care for the patients that are in there. A group of people to do all of that stuff so that you can talk on the phone, so that you have redundant satellite equipment if you need to, or whatever it is. Generally, the other side of the house is, hey, we're about to get a bunch of patients and we're going to have to surge our medical capability. The people who are already just trying to keep the building alive, the last thing they want to hear is, and we're bringing a bunch more. We can't do what we're doing now. The power's, we got some problems. And so, but the clinical people would say, hey, the big picture is we're the hospital. I don't know if you noticed, but they're coming here, whether we want them here or not. We can't go on divert to the disaster. So we need a plan to surge with our clinical staff as well. And so that rub is exactly to Shalon's point.
Well, your disaster plan for a hospital needs to be able to take care of the patients regardless of conditions. The end focus is to still take care of the patient. So your emergency management coordinator needs to have that concept and wrap that in an all hazards approach. Apply the hazard, but the end result is how will you continue to take care of the patient, being one patient or a surge of patient. If you have that, then you'll have a good system.
How many people in the audience are from hospitals? Raise your hand. Okay, good. How many of you guys have a full-time emergency management coordinator, emergency preparedness person? Raise your hand. Full-time. Okay. Final count, you guys who just raised your hand, how many of those are clinical? They were somehow a clinical person.
2, 3, 4.
Okay. How many that person is not a clinical person, but is an emergency preparedness, emergency management type, facilities, etc.? What, you guys raised your hand a lot lower, but I saw them all. I would say that was an 80-20 mix. Do you guys agree, just looking in the room?
And half the 20 blind.
So, by the way, we have to pass JACO. I mean, we have to get through the Joint Commission things. There are life safety boxes that have to be met. There are things that have to be done. I mean, the administration will look at it that we've got to accomplish those things. I think they can be done effectively together. but you have to start by recognizing that there's a difference. Dr. Adelot?
So it seems like this committee is like a 10,000-foot view committee.
Yep.
But we're having discussions like right this second, or really 10 seconds ago, now 15 seconds ago, about 10-meter level stuff. Well, yeah. So are we getting in the weeds? I'm new. Are we getting in the weeds because we have some sort of educational responsibility or preparedness responsibility to pass down to individual institutions or RACs? Or are we getting in the weeds? Why are we doing that?
Okay, so look at number 4.
Okay.
Agenda item number 4 is identify 2016 priorities. So we have the focus for the last, I've been watching it for the last 15 minutes, has been to drill into 2 or 3 issues. One is structural with emergency management, another is hospital preparedness, another, because we have a tendency to go off onto various tracks like infectious disease because there's money there. And then we lose sight of our focus, and that's why I spent a little bit of time with this, because now at the 10,000, not the 50 like the PCC, but at the 10,000 foot view for this year, what do we want to accomplish? Do we want to focus on more hospital preparedness and finding ways to make this linkage? I like listening to people who are doing these straw polls. I think it's way better to have people who are coming to these meetings and find out that what we're thinking generally is in line with what reality is. So we're verifying our assumptions in some ways by having a discussion that's meaningful to the audience, maybe is the way to think about it.
I'll tell you what, this issue of emergency management people, they're called different things in different hospitals too. But we're talking about the people in charge in the hospital of, like, when something goes bad, they're in charge of putting all the plans together and all the stuff. Right. One of the big barriers to making your hospital go is that they put people, they being the hospital or the network of hospitals, put people in charge of those plans and those things that are not recognized in the ER every day or on the wards or in the ICU. And so when you do things like practice a mass casualty incident, to be honest, the real clinical caregivers, I'm just giving you the dirt opinion, the real clinical caregivers roll their eyes and say, okay, I'll do this, but I don't recognize you, dude. And I'm just going to nod my head and check off my JCO. But really, when it comes right down to it, at University Hospital in San Antonio, everyone's going to do what John Myers says to do. Well, but that is a very real, John Myers is the trauma director there. That is a very real thing that goes unnoticed. And here, an 80-20 poll, it would be interesting to know, of the 80 who don't have a clinical position or aren't recognized as a clinical entity, how intimate are they with the John Myerses, the trauma directors and the people? And again, I'm focused on mass casualty stuff, explosion events, but this is sort of translatable to other things like infectious disease outbreaks and others. One of my interests in getting on this committee really was to see how we can help as a state pass along some things that really the U.S. military, quite frankly, has to relearn every deployment. Just so you know, it's not really built in to their curriculum because they're experts in mass casualty stuff, but only because they get their feet on the ground and have like experience in it. But can we do something at a state level that facilitates bringing the clinical and the emergency management people together in a way that is, one, seamless, two, doesn't cost a ton of time and effort from, hiring people to, away from their normal regular jobs, and put things together in a way that we can sort of streamline the process at the 10-meter level? Is there something we can do at the 10,000 foot level to do that? I mean, off the cuff, I'm thinking, is there, like, for example, money set aside to do a little research project amongst all of us to, like, go to each individual hospital and kind of ask these questions? It's not just a straw poll in here, because that's a little bit of selection bias. But I mean, is there a way to do that? For those of you who don't know, when I was in San Antonio, we did a survey in the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma. We asked all the trauma directors, how many of you know your plan? And then we asked specific questions on the plan to see if they were tricking us. And a lot of them were tricking us or didn't know the plan. And that reflects this. And that's a bad thing, because you don't really want to reinvent the wheel. You should utilize both things that exist in the same hospital, but in a way that makes the actual clinical caregiving, where the blood falls onto the boots, makes that seamless and doable, and you don't want to have to reinvent that system when it's actually going down. So that I would suggest that identifying a priority, I would like to know if we could make that a priority of our committee to do a little research for just focusing on our state, and to see if, and item number 2 would be to see if maybe there's an educational thing that we could put together that might make it more seamless at the 10-meter level, the hospital level.
So what is the major, what's the problem that we've identified? The disconnect between emergency management in the hospital and the clinical caregivers?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
So that's the issue, and the result of that is inability to handle surge capacity.
The result would be, I don't know what the result of that is. My hypothesis is, I would imagine that if it's anywhere like any of the hospitals I've ever worked in that have that disconnect, mass casualty preparedness, it is really sort of a pencil whip at the clinical level, because it's a real serious issue to people that the clinical people don't really see or do.
No, they don't care.
Or they don't care. And it's a, and the don't care part.
Well, the don't care part comes in from a clinic that I've come across is the clinicians are more, I need staff. I need, that's half a support. And a surge, and we can function the next 6 or 8 hours, but I know who to call to get additional whatever if I'm needing that. The biggest issue on a daily operations from the clinicians is, I need staff, do we have enough, moving people around, do I have the right people?
Yeah. The plans don't necessarily match up, and the planners don't necessarily match up with the clinical people, and the answer to that is, I have no idea what that impacts at the hospital level.
Michael, are you talking, when you say emergency management, are you talking hospital emergency management, or are you talking county emergency management coordinator?
So he means the emergency preparedness person, the EOC, so that's even worse. The hospital people would call it the EOC person, the environment of care. Who knows what that means for the environment of care? Okay, when I say the word, watch this. When I say the word EOC, who thinks environment of care? Raise your hand.
Well, I'm cheating because I only reviewed it recently.
When I say EOC, it means the Emergency Operations Center at the city where everybody meets when there's a disaster. Raise your hand.
2 days ago.
Okay? That EOC, and when you have conversations in a hospital setting who have no idea about external emergency management, EOC is environment of care issues. I have struggled with this all the time talking about it. So, Jason, I think you've identified. This has been a passion of mine. I've got slides. I've talked about this forever. The dichotomy between the emergency preparedness person in a hospital who has very clear guidelines to accomplish. Who's an emergency preparedness person at a hospital? Okay. Do you have very clear things that you know will get you fired if you don't pass? I'm pretty sure you have extremely, I got the book, I got the chapter. I'll show you what you have to pass. And those things are focused on because we have to get that done or the hospital closes, right? It's a joint commission problem.
Not with DNV, it's not.
And so the challenge is nice to, I'm not saying this is right, I'm saying what is. The challenge is between what must be done and what should be done. And when must be done exceeds should be done calories, right? I mean, there's only so many calories in the bucket that day. You do the must be dones. Everybody knows that, or else you don't do the job for very long. There's one of two things. You can do all the should be dones and none of the must be dones, but you'll be successful, just not here.
I would like to know, I would submit that a good thing for this committee to do, even though we're a 10,000-foot committee, it would be a good thing to look into what kind of funding is available for, y'all are going to think this is a research project, but it's not necessarily a research project. It's really a QI or a PI project of identifying how many hospitals in our state have this disconnect and how often that disconnect is significant. Because I don't think we really know that information. It would be nice to know. Because you can't really identify education opportunities if you're not really certain of the problem.
If you go to Oklahoma City, they have one of the best laid plans for a building collapse. If you go to Northridge or San Ysidro, they have a great earthquake plan. If you go to, right, and they have, if you went to Joplin, I bet if you went to Joplin, Missouri today, they have one of the most complex and effective post-tornadic event plans known to man, because it is exact, and we're as guilty. Our Texas plan for hurricane response post-Katrina Rita was phenomenal. The work we did for 2 or 3 years, we had one of, it was self-evident in Dolly, Edward, Gustav, and Ike, right? Can you imagine if we had had the 2008 hurricane season without the 2005 hurricane season that didn't go as well? It'd have been of epic proportions with back-to-back hurricanes that whole 2008 season. My point to that is communities, hospitals, whatever, tend to plan for their last event, and they plan most vigorously within 10 days to 1 year from the event. Whatever happened to your hospital last year, this is, all the clinicians are mad, we need to have, let's get together. You go, well, where have you guys been? All the emergency preparedness people say, well, where were you guys? I tried to call 3 meetings 6 months ago. Y'all wouldn't even come. So I don't want, please don't interpret this that I'm beating up on the emergency preparedness people at all. I'm not. I'm saying that, and Dr. Adelot, to your point, I think getting some, and I think a PI project's the way to think of it, a process improvement project as opposed to research, because if we don't identify that there really is, and objectively identify there really is a dichotomy to this, we can't work on it. I do think it will affect the outcome if you have a disaster. Now, hopefully, no one has that disaster, but we all know that disaster's coming to everybody at one point or another in your career.
What I have found that has helped us is to integrate clinicians is on my emergency preparedness subcommittee. That's where you bring those clinicians in. That way they can ask the questions, well, how does that affect the clinical part? In that subcommittee, you can educate and get their input on what they're going to need. And even with mine, I have three positions on it. But I have a panel of 15 to 20 people on it that are from the subordinate areas, not subordinate, but outlying areas within the hospital to make it all work. And that works very well.
Do you have a comment? Is that on?
Very
Oh.
short.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little tall.
You can raise it up. There's a
well,
knob or something. That looks painful.
I didn't want to mess it up for everybody else. But good morning. I'm Sam Vance. I'm the EMS for Children Program Manager for Texas. As long as we are talking about disaster preparedness for hospitals, per the pediatric readiness assessment that we conducted back in 2012 and 13, it identified that only 46% of our hospitals include pediatrics in their disaster preparedness plan. So if we are going to address disaster preparedness in hospitals, I would just ask that you remember to include the pediatrics, because during a disaster there's plenty of research to show that at least 30% of the patients that you receive are going to be under the age of 18. So thank you.
So what I would suggest is, underneath this committee, an extra job for me, you, whoever wants to do it, would be to form a little task force, if you want to call it. You can call it a subcommittee, but I hate the word committee, so I want to call it something else. but a little task force of people that are interested to, number one, define a way that we could study this for the PI purposes. Who would need to be studied and what would need to be looked at, from pediatrics to emergency management people to clinical people, and then come up with a plan on how you would actually execute that in the reporting system to this committee. I mean, that just seems like a good thing to do. And then is there money available for the people who it's too hard for them to do this as a volunteer?
I would suggest we talk to the HPP coordinators about, because they have ready access to all the hospitals. So that might be a group of people that can help drive this and be the foot soldiers of accomplishing this.
The challenge, so I agree with what you proposed. Oddly, it's how all those other things we were reporting out on start. I don't want to, this is a good idea comes up in a thing, we see a gap, we go, we're not going to solve it in here today. We got 19 more minutes, so what do? Let's put a small tiger team together, focus on this stuff. Next thing you know, it's a bullet point up on that agenda. Well, what are we doing about the PI project to look at hospital? It just is how it's going to happen. The hardest thing is finding what I call a fire starter, an evangelist. I mean, you're perfect for this. You're a clinician, you're working, you're a provider in a trauma hospital, in a lead facility. Those are the kinds of things we need to find, are people like yourself to help at least lead the effort from let's keep our eye on the ball, guys. What are we trying to accomplish? That's perfect. And I think we could do that. We could start that today. And if you're interested in that, we'll have a little sidebar outside because the next group will start in 19 minutes. If anything this group has provided, I think it's, Texas is a big place. There's 27 million people. There's a lot of programs that are going on with a lot of money. But there are not as many avenues to get into that next layer of system from the hospital that really goes through your RAC. So you would say, I'm going to go to our RAC's disaster preparedness meeting. You go to that, and oddly, ours sounds, a lot of times, we're either planning for the next exercise, we're working on some deliverables for the contract, or we're trying to get some, that's what ours sounds like a lot of times. And then you go, well, good Lord, if that's at the regional level, what is this, we're the next level up with the state level, and then you look at the state, the constellation of committees, how do all of those groups who have, it's a little bit like the emergency preparedness problem in the hospital, the EOC problem in the hospital, all of those groups have tasks, and they're not necessarily driven by what we want, but what someone in Atlanta wants, right? So this money comes, I think it's a little bit like the must versus should. We have things that I'd like Mark and his team to focus on in our RAC. I have things he shall focus on, and I have things that he should focus on. And the shoulds, I think, would be, in a lot of times, better at preparing us. But I don't get to make the decision if we accept the money. So the other flip side is you don't accept the money, and you focus on the things somehow that you should focus on. If advisory groups like this can find 10 items, I've said this for 10 years, if we could just pick what the 10 or 15 or 20 items are that would make us better, when the money comes in, we should match what the money's focus is on what item it is. If it's item number 3 and 7, it's 3 and 7. Let's knock that out. But it doesn't mean 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10 aren't important. It's just that right now we have some money for 3 and 7. Today it's infectious disease. That's whether it's Ebola, whether it's Zika, whether it's pan flu. There's a bunch of money that's focused and targeted at that. My staff is working tirelessly to put all this stuff together. Is our mass Cal plan necessarily suffering for that? I actually would say probably. That's frustrating for me, but at the same time, infectious disease was on my list of 10 or 15 things to focus on. So it's a practical approach to it. I'm not sure it's the most holistic approach. But even identifying the fact that there are 1 to 10 is my goal for the holistic approach. This particular issue's been on it's like a ghost that keeps coming back and haunting me from years past. This issue we're talking about right now. And it is at the 10-meter level. But if we don't, this is the avenue to get it from the 10-meter level into the constellation where real money is and real work can be accomplished to make a difference for every hospital, as opposed to just your hospital's better. Okay, well, the other 10 in your area aren't. Does that make sense?
Eric, I think another thing is perhaps the quality of exercises.
Did everybody agree with that? Who thinks the quality of exercises could be improved? So,
Me,
I didn't really almost get fired, but it was one of those like near misses because, and I'm going to tell you this story because it's going to prove actually that I was right, first of all, which I like. Second of all, it's going to reinforce this idea about exercises. We had a decon exercise, we had training for decon. And for hazmat technician class, when you go through that, there's just some poor chumps at the end that are going to have to get naked and get decons. And the class, you draw straws, you sort of pick the guy that's not going to argue, whatever, however it works out, somebody's going to be naked, and you're going to go through the process, and everybody's going to do the practical, right? When we started doing decon for the hospitals, I said, well, who are we going to get naked? I mean, this is, in the ER parking lot. And they all said, well, what are you talking about? We're just going to have them wear their swimsuits. And I said, you can't do that. You train as you fight, fight as you train. And so I said, well, what we could do, I don't know where you get them, but could we just get like those, the people that stand for people to draw? There's models that will stand there and, for art classes, whatever. Oh my God, that we can't do that. Oh no. And so half the room's with me, half the room's against me. We end up not doing it. We're going to use a swimsuit technique. In less than 3 hours, Ronnie Stewart, my board chair, Ronnie calls me and says, what are you doing spending grant dollars on strippers? I went, what are you talking about? He says, one of the hospital people, it circulated back that you're trying to spend grant dollars and buy strippers to go through some course.
that's a fantastic idea if you really did that. I'm serious.
So we don't do it. The next 3 decon things we have, real decon problems, they set up, and now when people do come out the other side naked, we don't have the TV people are across the road up in a parking lot for an insurance company filming people coming out the backside, and the administrator's like, oh my God, let's get some tarps up. Well, we would have thought about the tarps if we had practiced with naked people, because when someone walks out of a tent in a swimsuit, you go, we're doing a good job. When they walk out naked, you go, what do we do to provide privacy to the perimeter, right? And we had 2 other hospitals that had a white powder problem, and everybody came out the backside wearing what? Their underwear. Because they didn't strip them in training. You train as you fight, fight as you train. And so they came out the backside in their folds, all the problems that you're going to have with not completely disrobing people. The other problem we have is with drills. I'm going to dump more of us. We drive them over in buses and try to walk them around the corner and do this big 500 patient thing. I'd rather take 20 people, 25 people, 1 ambulance and 3 pickup trucks and park them around the corner and just start driving them into the ER and throwing them out. Just 1 ER focused with 25 victims and say, giddy up, man, where are your backboards? But they're all coming in pickup trucks. It's proven 25 to 35% will come by EMS, and the others are going to come by, they're going to present POV. Police cruisers, exactly. So,
but if you look contractually in HPP, you can't use any dollars because that's a single hospital exercise. So that sort of goes to how the contracts are written and how the money flows to what is really important.
From a hospital standpoint, I don't care about your contract.
Well, no,
I gotta do the drill anyway, however I wanna do it. Funding is irrelevant.
well, but I understand that. But if you're
Would you
trying to
move
do
our-
an
you can move our rack
exercise,
stuff like that, that'd be great.
if you're trying to do an exercise and you want to transport a number of people, which up until this year and the second half of last year, we haven't really transported anybody in years because the hospitals all get really thin white patients. That's how the patients come in, and that is not helpful. It's not helpful at all. So this time when we tried to do it, Sam will be very happy. We tried to look at what our population of pediatrics is and to make sure that the victims reflected a similar population. The hospitals are like, oh, no, we don't know who's going to be responsible for those kids. We don't want to do that. EMS doesn't really want to transport them if it's really not an emergency. So there are big issues with how we're going to do that. And if we ask EMS services to take out a large number of units for a period of time, the bottom line is that's dollars and cents. And we don't, at least in our RAC, we do not have a good mechanism to try to help in reimbursing them for the lost revenue that they're going to have during that time if they're not doing patient transports or patient transfers.
Yep, so the practical components of this are, the theories are great. The theories are easy. Actually, I'd say this all the time. The solutions to problems are easy. Well, they are. World hunger? Feed hungry people. How hard is this? Feed hungry people. Well, it's the choices that become difficult, right? And trying to find with limited dollars where we're going to focus, and then the bureaucracy tied to those choices that are difficult. We did do kids for a while. We did Boy Scout troops and stuff for our drills, but it's incredibly difficult liability-wise because if you lose them, the parents, they get upset, and it's a big deal. So we're using nursing students now, and we don't reflect the population. Sam, to your point, we don't reflect, they all are, we do move their ages around some. There's like some 25-year-old or 23-year-old nursing student who's supposed to be a 69-year-old, so.
When was the last time somebody in their exercise tried to decon a naked 9-month-old?
Right.
I suggest you do that with the mother.
Well, I'm just saying, they're slippery, they're, you know, it's a,
No,
they don't like to be cold, I mean, it's a mess.
okay, so we got this as an action item, the disconnect and exercise, the more realistic exercise processes. What other issues, we have a lot of these. IDRU is going to be on the agenda as a priority for this year. Infectious Disease Response Unit will take up a bunch of our time in May. In May, it may take the whole meeting, in fact, some of the brief outs and things we're doing. I think this disconnect, this project that we're talking about is another good priority. Who has another one? Committee members or audience members? You go, you know, I've been coming to this thing for 3 years, and y'all never talk about X. What's going to kill us? What are we missing? This is your chance. Okay, when you talk about it at the bar tonight about how big an idiot we are, then remember you had your opportunity to come get into the fray.
One of the big disconnects we saw in the last tornado event in my area was the emergency managers, even city emergency managers that didn't know how to reach out for additional resources. When we did the AAR and kind of came in really uninvited and talked to them about some of the resources that they didn't request, it was amazing. They didn't know it existed.
And to springboard off of that, I would say that the way to, I wrote down Hospital Preparedness Interactivity Assessment Task Force. Well, to springboard off of that, and your concern would be the regional one. The Regional Preparedness Interactivity Task. It would be nice to know what's out there that's redundant, what's out there that how many of these hospital managers that we're going to go, or emergency managers that we're going to go interview, how many of them know off the cuff who exactly to call if? That would be nice to know, because that's a reflection of the regional preparedness. I mean, if you're looking for agenda items or things that we should be interested in. Well, I'm very interested in that. I'd like to know. Because there could be a gap there. And it could be a gap that we think doesn't exist, but quite frankly does. And then now we can then, in May's meeting or the next meeting or even next year, begin to discuss the educational opportunities to make those things go away, those gaps, or at least get more narrow.
Mike? Throughout all this, I think we need to remember that there's more of this state than Interstate 35 and east. Where? It's out west. You know, the way you do things, Baylor, Scott, and White, Temple, is a whole lot different than you do at Hardin County Memorial Hospital in Quanah, Texas, which is a 24-bed critical access hospital. Personally, I don't know how you get 24 people in there. But having worked in both places, I've seen the difference. And there's a lot of other counties that are in worse shape than Hardin County. So we need to know, you know, if you have a tornado that comes through, say, Childers, where are those people going to go? That's a town of about 7,000 to 8,000 people, and there's not any hospital resources close. The nearest hospital of any size would be in Amarillo, which is 100 miles away. So we have to keep the rural folks in mind as well.
I fully agree. And where we have the, so first I'll say, I think we are one of the best states at responding to those incidents, even if the people who are going to be kind of directly involved at a local level don't exactly know how it's going to work. TDEM has become, I think in the last 5 years, and I'm not saying this because Nem and I are friends or because he's on this committee, I think he has revolutionized TDEM and the integration with the district coordinators, with local emergency management and local public safety officials, the representation. I think it's as strong as it's ever been. Anybody disagree with that? And Jacob, you identified it well. So I think that the state, if I went down through the system, from the SOC and SMOC, back through EMTF SCO, back down into the district coordinators and the state coordinators that are working the problem, and the emergency management coordinators in those towns working with the district coordinator and the state coordinator people in those regions. I think all that system actually works pretty slick. Honestly, I do. But to Dr. Adelot's point, and I think Jacob's point as well, there is this component between, I call it my friend's friend. So I have an EMS agency, and Shalon is next to me on this line, and every day we run a call where it's quicker for her to send me another truck from that, and my dispatcher knows their number, they call, it happens in seconds, happens all the time. It's like, oh, that's one of those calls. In fact, we have a few places that I have a finger that goes over here in her county that we've just agreed she's gonna go to it. It's in my county, but we've agreed as an automatic gate, she's gonna go to that call when it happens in that new neighborhood that went down that finger on that ITJ. Okay, so that's mutual aid, and she comes and helps me, I go help her, we're agreed to it. It's the problem of when I have 15 cars in a wreck, not 3. 3, I've got. 15, we're gonna need more assets. And I called my neighbor on this side, and this side, and this side, my 4 buddies, right? It's a square county, I got a north, south, east, west border that people can come help. But that's not enough. How do I get my neighbor's neighbor? Because guess who Shalon knows? Jason, that guy over there at Jason County EMS. And I know who he is. I've seen him at RAC meetings, or I know, but I don't know, maybe my dispatcher's not really written as well. And some parts of this state have done phenomenally well of building out this regional mutual aid capability and the next steps that have to happen. Others have not. And it's not that the largest have and the smallest haven't. It's not that the small have. It's just hit and miss where we know what the actual boots on the ground, blood on the boots guys know how to make that happen and the next tier up. When it rises slightly above them to the emergency management level locally and up from there, well-oiled machine. Who disagrees with that it's a well-oiled machine from the emergency management coordinator of a jurisdiction above into the TDEM system? Who thinks that doesn't work well? honestly. You can feel free to disagree, but I think it does.
It's the initial layers.
Our problem specifically in EMS, it's a little bit like in the hospital with the ER we talked about. We do these mini disasters all the time. Is a bus wreck, is a school bus wreck, something that emergency management would necessarily plug into all the time? Maybe, maybe not. In a smaller jurisdiction, maybe. If we had a bus wreck in San Antonio, I'm not sure Chief Trevino and the district coordinator would even have any idea. Thank you for having that little alarm. If we have a bus wreck in Medina County that's next door, that's probably going to get everybody's attention. And it's back to what does overwhelmed mean. I just think this is another gap we can work on.
Plus, you have to look at with the geography of Texas, sometimes your neighbor's 300 miles away from you. So that makes it a little challenging.
Okay, our time's up. Any other items? We've identified 2 or 3 or 4 really good ones. We're going to continue with some of the ones that are pressing as well. Any last thoughts as we kind of wrap up?
Eric?
Joe?
Nothing to do with this, just for logistics. So this is a new place, obviously first time here. They have brought in additional staff, and there's a buffet at lunchtime, so people are staying around so that you can get in and get out and get on to the next programs. So this will make that available. If you haven't found them yet, down the hall to the right is the restrooms. Obviously, the other stuff is right outside here. So, and I have no clue where the pop-out room is. Somebody tell me.
Are we going to be here from that? Are we here for a while at this place?
I believe for the year.
For the year? At this location?
I'm pretty sure it's a year contract.
Okay.
Where's the pop-off room? Yeah.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Right across the hall for the pop-off.
Right across the hall for the pop-off. If you want to talk to Dr. Adelon about that, we'll go in the pop-off room. Yay. Seriously.
That was good. No, it is a real huge
We would take over the next meeting.